Canadian Club, we have a 115-year history of hosting provoking discussions on issues that matter to Canadians. At the start of every season, we aim to advance discussions on relevant public policy topics of the day. And I think it's fair to say that today's lunch hits that proverbial ball right out of the park. I don't think anyone in this room would like to take credit for the recent StatsCan report on job losses, but it surely does push today's topic and the Mowat Centre's report to the forefront of public debate in Canada. During the first mandate of Jean Chrétien's government, unemployment insurance became employment insurance, and a number of changes were made to the program. There have been tweaks and small refinements since then. Recently, for example, Stephen Harper's government made short-term adjustments to the program in response to the 2008 recession. But the question is, are those changes enough? And I think we're going to hear today that they're not. With changes to the labor market and to the global economy, it is time to talk about how to renew employment insurance so that it better serves Canadians. The emphasis has to move from being a stopgap method of income to support to something that focuses on helping Canadians find and keep full-time, meaningful jobs. The report before us today is the result of over a year and a half of consultation and research. It could not have arrived in front of Canadian policymakers at a better moment. To reveal and discuss the findings and the recommendations of the task force, we're privileged to have a wonderful panel with us here today. The Honourable Roy Romanow served as Premier of Saskatchewan from 1991 to 2001, and also headed the Federal Commission on the Future of Healthcare in Canada. For many of us, of course, Mr. Romanow, you are remembered for the crucial and critical role you played in the patriation of our Constitution and the adoption of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Ratna Omidvar exemplifies in all of her pursuits a dedication to helping immigrants in this country find jobs that match their skills. She personifies that in diversity there is strength. She currently serves as the president of Mathew, a private foundation that promotes equality through policy development, grants, and programs. Mathew Mendelsohn, our third panelist, is the founding director of the Mowat Centre, whose purpose is to challenge the policy assumptions of the last century and ensure that Canada is competitive as we go forward in this century. Previously, he was the Deputy Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs and the Associate Secretary to the Cabinet in the Government of Ontario, and of somewhat lesser acclaim, my former politics professor at Queen's University. There's nowhere to go but up, Mathew. We'll begin with a short presentation from each of our panelists, after which we will turn over the discussion to question and answers with you. On each of your tables should be a bunch of question cards that look something like this. So as they occur to you, please write your questions on these cards and raise them up, and a volunteer will come and collect them. At the end of the panel's remarks, it will be my job to ensure we get as many questions in as possible. So without further ado, it is now my honor to turn the podium over to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, for that warm welcome, and thank you all for turning out for this riveting package of policy proposals. I've always thought that Canada holds so many surprises for people who were not born here, and one of the more pleasant surprises is our enviable social safety net that looks after us in times of sickness, old age, and need. The employment insurance system is part of that enviable social safety net, with the intended purpose of protection for workers who lose their jobs so that they can get quickly back on their feet. Sadly, though, that promise goes unfulfilled today for many, not intentionally or out of malice of any kind, but more as a result of an unintended outcome of policies that have not stayed in tune with our changing times. The EI system that we currently have was designed for a time and for a labor market that no longer exists. Single-earner households with males in full-time permanent employment who suffered occasional job losses. 30 years later, our reality is very different. Women make up a significant portion of our workforce. immigration and the rise of the knowledge and service-based economy have created fundamental shifts in the labor market. Part-time jobs, self-employment, multiple jobs, this is the reality for many workers today. Many people who pay into the EI system have variable access to benefits, depending largely on where they live. In 1981, 86% of workers were able to access EI. In 2010, this number had sunk to 46%. So our proposals are relatively simple and aim to provide useful, timely, and much-needed solutions. So as a first proposal, we propose one national system with a single national entry requirement and standard duration, regardless of where you live, much like other systems such as the child tax benefit or old age security. Further, we don't think that young workers and new Canadians should face higher barriers to benefits that are enjoyed by other Canadians. Those left out of the EI system, those who can't pay into it, should have protection against sudden income loss. That is why we are recommending a flexible, nimble, and repayable form of EI, temporary unemployment assistance, that is separate from the employment insurance system. EI is also not well designed for workers who are facing structural decline and sometimes elimination of their sectors. That is why the task force recommends experimenting with ways to help workers who have held the same job for many years but find themselves suddenly unemployed. This package of reform also provides fairness to temporary foreign workers and people with disabilities. It provides flexibility to parents taking parental leave and creates more training opportunities for Canadian workers across the country. I am really pleased to have served as an advisor, as a mere advisor to this task force, and I know that Roy welcomes and joins me in thanking Mathew Mendelsohn and his incredible team for bringing us to this point with policy innovations that are creative, practical, and fiscally responsible, and position EI as a tool for national unity instead of regional disparities and discrepancies. A redesigned EI system will work for Canada today and will prepare us for Canada tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ratna. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As people would understand, this is the culmination of a long process, and unlike many Canadian Club presentations where someone is coming and sharing their own ideas, I'm not really sharing only my own ideas. I am a vessel and a channel for this report, and this report is the product of enormous work from enormous people, not enormous people, excuse me. Well, a couple of them are enormous. There's some with enormous egos. That's me, by the way. But enormous work and great dedication from people who worked on the report: John Meadow, Mary Davis, Josh Yarrison, the whole Mowat Centre team, Neville Maguire, but also our advisory group, many of whom are in this room, and our researchers, again, many of whom are in this room and are sharing this moment with us as we present these findings. I want to thank Alison for making this podium available. This is always a good podium to connect with a wide group of people. And just for the record, Alison, the highlight of my career was teaching you. It has been all downhill from there. We at the Mowat Centre know a great deal about employment insurance. We probably know as much as anybody knows about employment insurance at this point. But what was striking to me this morning as I did a series of interviews coast to coast on CBC radio was before each interview. Some of you may have participated in this process where you start the east country and you move west. Before each interview, whether I was talking to Gander or Winnipeg or Vancouver or Yellowknife, I'd go onto the HRSDC website and check what the eligibility arrangements were in that community. And you can see the map. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, employment insurance, Canada is divided into 58 economic zones, which condition how long you have to work and how generous your benefits are, how long you can keep benefits. And as I went through and clicking this, the anomaly of employment insurance becomes even more stark as you click through maps where people in Winnipeg, for example, we did a Winnipeg talk this morning. Someone in Winnipeg qualifies for benefits that are completely different than someone 10 minutes north of Winnipeg, who qualifies for benefits that are quite different from someone who is 10 minutes south of Winnipeg. So people working in the same firm for the same amount of time, laid off at exactly the same time, would see quite different benefits. And we just don't think that this is consistent with the expectations that Canadians have about social policy and equality of treatment, whereby the federal government undertakes national, federal social policy in ways that further equality. Let's see if this works. Whenever Mowat Centre organizes a presentation, it tends that the PowerPoint doesn't work. But this one looks like it is. So again, we made a good choice joining the Canadian Club. You have better technological skills than we do. I want to talk a little bit first about why EI is so important and getting it right is so important. EI is at the junction between economic and social policy. EI is a key policy tool to both deliver on the promise of a social safety net that Ratna spoke about, but also as an important labor market tool to encourage labor mobility, to encourage labor market attachment. So it is so important that we get it right. It is also so consistent with our core values. There are almost no Canadians who would say that if someone loses a job through no fault of their own, they shouldn't have some kind of social protection that allows them to look for new work and reattach themselves to the labor market. So the issue for us, as Ratna has pointed out, is not that that any one government of any stripe or any bureaucracy or any set of decision makers has had any malice, but we are going through profound social and cultural changes in the nature of the country and the nature of the labor market, and the social policy architecture of that has not kept up in some important ways. And so the question for us is how we continue to deliver on that promise of a social safety net and effective labor market policy in ways that respond to the new world of work and the new Canada. We think, as Ratna has pointed out, that some of the things that we are presenting are ones that would really allow us to fulfill that promise in a better way. So I would say that we do have a key opportunity right now to reconstruct a key piece of our social and economic policy architecture. I think that the ground beneath us is already shifting. I think the debate around employment insurance is already shifting. It may not be apparent to everyone on a day-to-day basis, but it is becoming increasingly clear that workers in urban areas with precarious employment who are now clustering around our biggest cities should not be asked to carry an unfair burden for an employment insurance system that may encourage seasonal work or other intermittent work patterns in other communities. Our principles were pretty simple. We wanted to be there when workers needed it. We wanted to contribute to a dynamic labor force and productivity, and we wanted it to treat all Canadians equitably. And as Ratna has pointed out, that leaves us with a bottom line recommendation of a need to create a nationally standardized EI system that would be supplemented by new benefits that would help those who are currently outside the EI umbrella and not well served by the current system. As Ratna has pointed out, EI is not keeping pace with the Canada of today. Fewer and fewer people are covered, and that's not necessarily just EI's fault. That is about transitions that have taken place in the broader Canadian economy, the growth in a variety and diversity of employment, huge growth in urbanization and immigration, and workers in many places have access to far fewer benefits for far less time, and a growing diversity in the labor market, which creates opportunities for us, I think, to begin to look at how we can tailor benefits in ways that are client-centered, flexible, and respond to the needs of a much more diverse workplace. The concerns that were driving us were the large number of people that are not covered and the large number of people that pay for benefits for which they have almost no chance of qualifying. We are concerned about the complexity of a system that is not client-centered, that is difficult for individual workers and businesses to understand why they're entitled to benefits or how they access benefits. And as I pointed out, the unprincipled anomalies do create real tensions in various communities, as someone in Halifax and someone just outside of Halifax are entitled to quite different suites of benefits. We are also building in Canada a much more elaborate social policy architecture of parental leave, of training benefits, of compassionate leave. Many of these are delivered through EI, and many of these, therefore, are not available to huge numbers of workers. So the question is whether we can find ways to deliver programs and these benefits that we apparently as a society are committed to offering and are important entitlements and components of a modern labor force in ways that respond and serve the needs of more workers. As we're also very aware, for those in the policy wonk world, the current funding model is exacerbating recessions because it has to be balanced over a fiscal year, and so it is pro-cyclical, which I think no one wants, and the federal government has made a commitment to address this, and they're currently undertaking consultations to fix the funding and governance structure. But that was another concern that was driving our findings. We think we need in Canada a better, more robust human capital strategy, and with the devolution of labor market training programs from the federal government to the province, but coupled with that devolution was a requirement that those programs could only be delivered to EI recipients or those who are eligible for EI. It creates enormous pressure now on a diversity of provinces that are actually delivering the programs, trying to develop human capital strategies, trying to upskill people, trying to fill labor shortages, but most of those funds are not available to be deployed in flexible, nimble ways to deal with workers who need additional skills, who may be long-term unemployed, who may have part-time work, but who are not part of the EI, officially the EI system. We also think that the issues of structural transformation, particularly in Ontario in the manufacturing sector, but elsewhere, have created huge concerns as people may have paid into EI for 30 years, and at the end of the day, if they are seeing fundamental transformation in their sector, are eligible for benefits that we consider not commensurate with the length of time that they have contributed and participated in the labor market. And we are interested in whether there are more creative ways of encouraging labor market attachment for these workers. And I think there's also an additional reality that must be acknowledged, which is that for many sectors in globally competitive information sectors, many businesses in globally competitive information sectors, they're probably paying premiums that undermine the competitiveness of their business to support and subsidize other businesses that are using EI as an ongoing income supplementation system to design their workforce and part of their business strategy designed around seasonal work and predicted layoffs of people that are being subsidized by many of the businesses that are now looking to create jobs and employ people in globally competitive sectors. I would say that the overview of our recommendations is that we think they are balanced, realistic, and fiscally responsible. There are some costs with some of them, but we do believe that they can be calibrated based on government preference and economic situation of the day. Our proposals are architectural in nature. We don't say how long someone should have to work in order to collect benefits. Different governments will have different preferences, and those things will evolve. That should probably be different in the middle of a recession, in the middle of an economic boom. So we are getting at the core of the program and saying how should it be designed in ways that work and are consistent with the modern labor market. What we aspire to is to see a system of unemployment assistance join the other federal social programs, Canada Pension Plan, Quebec Pension Plan, Old Age Security, Guaranteed Income Supplement, Working Income Tax Benefit, the National Child Benefit. These programs that are now key pieces of the Canadian landscape that have been embraced by people in all parties and across the ideological spectrum, and people may have disagreements or disputes about their level of generosity or whether they need to be redesigned, but they are not sources of interregional tension where workers across the country think that someone else is getting a better deal than they are. And we think that this is a key opportunity to help create that kind of program. As we've said, as Ratna said, the core of our recommendation is one national program to treat workers equally, and that within a strengthened architecture, the level and duration of benefits could be adjusted to reflect government preference at the time or economic conditions. We think that those who are left out of the EI umbrella, which represent a growing number of workers, which represent a growing number of workers clustered around large cities, which represent a growing number of young workers, and which represent a growing number of new Canadian workers, and also new immigrants who may not be Canadian citizens yet, that many of these people are left out entirely of the EI umbrella. And I'm very proud that we have had people from across the political spectrum and from a variety of different partisan orientations recognize that a form of temporary unemployment assistance structured as a repayable income contingent loan that people outside of EI could access in a quick, nimble way if they have short-term income needs provides a step forward in our income security architecture, and it can be designed in a variety of different ways that would be either more generous or less generous, more repayable or less repayable, depending on government preference of the day. We are proposing that the government begin to test a system called wage insurance, which allows long-tenured workers who have contributed over a lifetime to draw some money out of EI to supplement their income if they take jobs that are significantly lower in pay. So the challenge for long-tenured workers is often not finding a job, but adjusting to a new economic situation if their sector has basically gone through a transformation. And wage insurance is a short-term transition mechanism that will allow workers to adjust and stay attached to the labor market. We think that we need a national human capital strategy in Canada, and a national human capital strategy, given that training funds have been devolved to the provinces, requires provinces to work together, but also to develop their own human capital strategies and training programs and ensure that they're accessible to anyone. Here in the GTA, it might mean ensuring that training programs are more available for newcomers, for part-time workers, many of whom are outside the EI umbrella. We think that this would strengthen the Canadian Economic Union. We have a whole series of additional recommendations, and I encourage you to read our report in detail. We think that temporary foreign workers need to be treated fairly. I'm offended as a Canadian that we ask temporary foreign workers to come here and pay for benefits, pay premiums for benefits that they can't access. And so we think probably the best solution is to integrate them fully into the EI system, particularly given that temporary foreign workers in many parts of the country are now increasingly having their permits renewed, changing jobs, and behaving much more like other landed workers. We propose flexibility around sickness leave to allow people with disabilities to get a medical certification once that they have a chronic disability and be able to take some of the sickness leave through EI without requalifying in part days, 1 day here, 1 day there. We think we have labor market shortages coming up, and we think we need to find ways of encouraging people with disabilities, many of whom obviously want to be in employment, to stay in the workforce. We are proposing flexibility around parental leave. People here who work in the private sector would know that many people in the private sector don't have employer top-ups if they want to stay home with a child, and this creates much shorter parental leaves in the private sector for many workers. And so what we are proposing is a system whereby new parents could take longer benefits with less weekly benefit or shorter benefit period with greater benefit to encourage more people to be able to take advantage of the parental leave benefits that we have available. We propose a variety of transparency reporting, the testing of pilots, governance reforms that we think will strengthen the transparency and ability of Canadians to understand how the EI system works. We think our recommendations are rooted in the new Canadian realities. We think they are based on the same principles as other successful federal social programs. They are rooted in the belief that all workers should be treated equally in a shared sense of identity, and we think, depending on how they're adjusted, can be fiscally prudent and done flexibly. We think in the end they'll strengthen the Canadian Economic Union, the Canadian social safety net, and promote the equality of individuals, promote a client-centered approach to the delivery of important social benefits. We think that the federal government could move forward and has an opportunity. We recognize the politics of this issue are challenging and they require respectful conversation and perhaps transition mechanisms to ease the transition to a new program. But we think we need social policy architecture designed for the labor market of the 21st century, not the 20th, and we hope you'll support us. Thanks.
Well, Madam Chair, after listening to the presentations by Ratna and by Mathew, I am reminded of the time when I was in active politics and being introduced one time by a well-meaning chair who said something like this: ladies and gentlemen, we've heard these wonderful speeches. Now that all of the good things are over, here's our next speaker, Romanow. I'm not sure that I can add very much, but I do want to be here by my presence and by very few brief words to lend my complete support to this tremendous project by Mowat and by all of those who assisted it. I want to thank, first of all, the Toronto Canadian Club for maintaining its concern about the future of Canada, a progressive Canada and a united Canada. I remember full well in the debates in the late 1970s and 1980s when we were going through a very difficult and challenging time in Canadian unity history. One of the areas and centers of major concern was a Canadian Club, and you're still with it, talking about the issues which bind Canada together, make it strong, and make it very progressive, and I congratulate you in that regard. One other word again of support and congratulations to Mathew and Mowat, and aided by Keith Banting, one of our great intellectuals. The team that was put together by Mathew was first rate, and this report, I think, is going to be very difficult for those who would want to challenge and test it to have holes poked into it. It's been a delight to be associated with such a group of distinguished Canadian academics and scholars and people who are committed to improving this great country. Well, I would say the following. This report is an approach which is founded on and based on Canadian values. As has been said already, there are three principles which drive this report as I see it. One, unemployment insurance assistance must be there when workers need it. Number two, the program should encourage labor market attachment and the full utilization of our human capital. And number three, it should be equitable. To me, these three standards, these three commitments, really are the principles which are core to Canada's values. If someone loses their job in this country, there should be a safety net for them, and our social programs should help people get back on their feet and back to work as quickly as possible. So here we have an opportunity to build a strengthened new national program, one that is a source of national unity rather than, as Mathew has indicated, regional division. And I got involved because of my interest and commitment to this particular project and the way it's been framed and produced. It's my strong personal belief that one of the great goals of federal, provincial, social policy, Canadian policy, should be to transcend interprovincial and interregional divisions and foster common social citizenship. The federal government, working in concert with the provinces, it's a messy business sometimes, called cooperative federalism, sometimes confrontational federalism, has nonetheless achieved much in the past to attain these goals. I think of the Canada Pension Plan, Quebec Pension Plan, Old Age Security, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, the National Child Benefit, and I can go on. These were examples where the orders of government, pushed by the citizenry of Canada, have made a Canada which is more equal, more fair, more full of opportunity for people, regardless of their place of residence or their place of origin. And then there have been recent additional developments as well, the Modernizing Income Security for Working Age Adults process, to name one, the Working Income Tax Benefit, to name another, and one could go on. This is progress, and this is the way Canada is built, and this report stands full square right in the history, tradition, and looking to the future of this which has been accomplished, and as I've talked about or identified. But we know that EI stands out. That's clear, I think, by the presentations by Ratna and by Mathew. It is unique amongst federal income supports in its differential treatment of workers across the country. Differential. We are not the first to find that differentiated benefits cannot be justified on economic and social grounds, and that they politicize the program in ways that make sensible reforms more challenging, if not impossible. Moreover, we all know that we're living in uncertain economic times. Canada has had remarkable good fortune compared to others in the world, but we know too many of our fellow Canadians are falling through the cracks, as they say, in our social safety net, and all of this must change. Friends, more money is not always a solution to the problems, and the reforms proposed by the task force here are not based on that alone. They're not just sound social policy. They are those too. They are also reforms which are based on the importance of a skilled workforce and, importantly, most importantly, a strengthened economic union and a more just and fair Canada. The changes outlined are realistic. They are fiscally responsible. They are good for business. They're good for every one of us. They will strengthen the safety net for Canadians. While my own preference might have been to have erred on a little more of the recommendations with respect to some of the generosity of the benefits, I don't worry about that. What's important is that the report has set the framework and the groundwork for taking that and other matters into consideration. And by this report, Ottawa can undertake leadership and undertake significant nation-building steps through such a new national program as Mathew has articulated today. This would be a tremendous legacy and a major contribution to national unity, something which we always must be mindful of in this country. Of course, as Mathew has pointed out, the politics are always challenging, maybe on this issue more so than others, but that shouldn't stop us from taking this on and taking it on dead on, head on, and going right at it. The current program is simply not working well. It's worse than not working well. There are just too wide disparities and too many who are left aside. If we approach the issue with sensitivity, open dialogue and accommodation, and based on carefully thought out principles and research, as this tremendous academic work has done, and if we understand what we are as Canadians, we're all sharing the same destiny together, regardless of where we come from and what our backgrounds are, taking all of those into consideration, we can move forward in making this happen. And I believe that we shall move forward in making it happen. So in closing, I would say this: we know that there are challenging economic times, as stated, but I hope that you will join us, not only the club members, but through your various other associations, in seizing this opportunity based on this excellent work to transition toward a strengthened national program, one that truly reflects the Canada of today and tomorrow, a plan that reflects the true basic values of this great country. And together, we can do it. I'm honored to have been a small part of this process, and thank you very much for listening to me, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Wonderful panel and wonderful provocative discussion. As promised, we'll spend a few minutes. I see lots of people sharpening their pencils and writing down cards, their questions. So perhaps as we begin, I'll start, if I may, Mr. Romanow, with a question to you. Well, you're free to answer it instead, Ratna, if you'd like.
I take all the easy questions. She'll take the hard ones.
Well, I'll make sure this is an easy one, sort of. This report seems full of two things that we know all federal politicians love. The first is that it will cost a bit of money, and the second is that it will involve lots of negotiations with the different regions of the country. So I'd be curious, just for your reflections on why a federal politician today should take this up and how they should go about doing it.
Are you sure this is an easy question? This is a difficult country to govern, and the question is, why should federal politicians take it up? First of all, my own personal belief about Canada's growth is based on this concept. We are a federation, and there are two orders of government, obviously, Ottawa and the provincial governments. Note the word that I use, not two levels, but two orders. And there are one of two ways in which we progress with respect to social policy, economic policy, which I think defines our values that I try to address. The two choices are that the two orders of government do not speak to each other, and they do their things more or less unilaterally, which I think provokes and stimulates a lot of regional differences, of which, by the way, this program has been already highlighted, as Mathew's pointed out. There is no other way but to get in and to follow the other approach, and that is sometimes calling it confrontational federalism, sometimes cooperative federalism. In my experience, there is no other way around building this country but having the provinces, the territories, led by the federal government, they speak for all of us, fashioning the reforms that this report is called for. This may be heresy to say, Mathew and Keith, maybe not all the recommendations which are set out herein. But I think that the premiers, in my experience, even coming from different perspectives, will be able to shave off the differences, minimize the disagreements, and revise and revamp this program in a fundamentally important way, as the report indicates. And finally, on the question of money. On the issue of money, it is substantial, there is no doubt about it, but it pales in comparison to the money and the cost to society with people who are left out there without jobs, not contributing, let alone their personal well-being and the way they approach it. All of that money pales in comparison to the current situation and not tackling it. I think we can benefit both ways by this cooperative entanglement or constructive entanglement, or if you will, cooperative federalism. We can strengthen the country in that way, and what a great way to do it around a program which I think cuts across political ideologies, essentially, because it speaks to a fundamental Canadian value. At least that's been my experience in the years that I've been around, and I don't think Canada's changed that very much, that it still can't be practiced this time around, too.
Thank you. So I've just been told we have 10 minutes for questions, so perhaps to help move that along, if you would mind just staying seated, we will save a little time there. A question from the audience. In addition or separate from the political support, what other support is required to get these recommendations implemented? And whose support is absolutely critical?
I think that the design of the recommendations is intended to appeal both to the left and the right, conservatives, liberals, across the political spectrum, across political parties. I think it also requires business and labor. Business and labor are both deeply invested in the employment insurance system. Employment insurance, as we know, is paid and funded through payroll taxes that people here pay. And so both labor and business have to be brought in and see that it's in their mutual interests. But I would also say that the proposals suggested here are instinctive common sense in most of the country. But there are regions that have historically relied on employment insurance as a form of ongoing income support, and many communities have structured their economies in that way and the businesses in that way. And the number and percentage is going down. And I think there is a new sense of optimism and economic growth and labor shortages in many places, where there is a growing recognition that that kind of model of income support that we may have done in the 60s or 70s is simply not sustainable. But it will require dialogue with all regions of the country, and it may require transition mechanisms to help communities prepare for the 21st century.
I'm going to merge two questions together. There are some wonderful ones here that are both about if you considered other things in preparing this report. So the first asks if you'd given any thought to the issue of financially supporting the pharmaceutical needs of individuals, so that EI choices don't have to be made around rent versus important medications. And then the second and related one is, did you give any consideration to extending benefits to workers who need to take time off work to provide care or support for family members who are suffering from illness?
We considered everything, I would say. I didn't talk too much about the process that we went through, and that's in the report. We did a number of public consultations and had a lot of meetings and considered just about any option you could think of. The question of pharmaceuticals and drug protection, I would say, is more relevant in the social assistance discussion, and the challenges that are created when individuals collect a variety of benefits on social assistance that they wouldn't collect if they were in low-paid employment, and that creates issues where the incentives for work aren't strong enough, and I think that's more a social assistance issue. As for the second issue, our bias throughout for the delivery of new social benefits and new elements of the social policy architecture are to do it through the tax system and outside of EI. Because what we discovered was no matter how much tinkering you can do with EI, there are going to be huge numbers of workers who aren't covered. We've proposed some modifications and some programs to help. But the continuing burdening of EI, narrowly defined as an insurance program that employers and employees pay to protect them against unexpected job loss. The burdening of that program and the premium base of training money, parental leave, a variety of other things, not only makes the program way more complicated and difficult to reform when reform is necessary, but it leaves more and more people out of that of those social benefits. So tax credits for people who need to take time off work to care for a loved one. I mean, our instinct is much more on that side, which would allow all workers to benefit, all Canadians to benefit, not just people within the EI umbrella. But we don't discuss that in a lot of detail.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question is with regards to temporary foreign workers. The question is, why is it better to integrate them into the system instead of alternatives such as offering a refund that could perhaps be effective if one is leaving Canada, for example?
Well, I think one of we've had lots of discussions about the temporary foreign workers, and it seems to us that because they are charged the employment insurance premium, it's problematic to remove that from the regime, because then it unfairly incents employers to hire temporary foreign workers as opposed to others, and we didn't want to go down that route. So it seemed to us that the basic principle of fairness should apply, that all temporary foreign workers who pay into the system should qualify for benefits. A refund, we haven't really dug down that deep into the question of what happens when a temporary foreign worker who's paid into the employment insurance fund actually leaves the country. Because the system is geared towards people who are in the country, who are available and looking for work. And that's a principle that I think will continue to stand. I think in further discussions, we want to explore how we can dig a little deeper into this temporary foreign worker issue, and if the question's coming from you, Dina, we would love to have further discussions with you on it.
I mean,
There are a few on that question, actually.
Yeah.
So
If I could add one issue, I mean, our top line recommendation is that temporary foreign workers should be treated fairly. Yeah. We, as Ratna said, came down on the side that they should be fully integrated, in part because increasingly in many parts of the country, particularly Western Canada, they're having their permits renewed successively over and over, and they're staying in Canada looking for work at the encouragement of a lot of local provincial organizations. So they are behaving much more like other workers. At the same time, it certainly would be possible to say they shouldn't pay premiums for benefits they are not going to collect, and so remove them entirely from the system. That is also an option, and we speak for fairness, but I think we've come down on the side of including them, as Ratna said.
Okay, last question, and we have 60 seconds to answer it. But I love the beginning. Congratulations on your work, and I think we'd all echo that. Did the task force look at the relationship between EI and pensions to reflect the need for Canadians who want to ease out of the workforce over a number of years?
I would say that's an issue we didn't explore in a lot of detail at the end of the day. That's an interesting question. Perhaps I'll have my all Mowat Centre will start a new task force tomorrow. But what I would say is that we were conscious of issues around severance. And so there are interactions between EI and severance where often long-tenured workers are able to get a significant severance package as their employment winds down, sometimes as a bridge to a pension, and that creates clawbacks in the EI regime, which seem unfair to long-tenured workers if they're getting a severance package from their employer. But we didn't look at the interaction, particularly with the pensions issue.
Well, homework for next week. Well, thank you, everybody, for your questions. There are actually a number of fantastic questions in here, and I'm sorry I couldn't get to them all, but I will pass them along to Mathew so he can share them with his team. I would now like to call on Nick Chambers to formally thank our presenters. Nick.
Thank you very much, Alison. On behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing and amplifying the recommendations of the Mowat Centre's Employment Insurance Task Force. Mr. Romanow, Ms. Omidvar, and Mr. Mendelsohn, the work you presented today clearly reflects the dedication and hard work of the Mowat Centre's researchers and authors, and the leadership you provided them along the way. Canada is the prosperous and compassionate country it is today because of leaders like the three of you and because of our willingness as a nation to tackle challenging issues and right the course when need be. You have made a strong case for a nationally standardized support system for the unemployed. We trust your voices will be heard loudly and clearly in Ottawa and across the country. We are most pleased that you chose the Canadian Club of Toronto as the platform to deliver your remarks today. Thank you, and best wishes from us all.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you to our panel. This concludes our television programming, which will be broadcast on Rogers Television in the days to come. We are grateful to Rogers TV and to 680 News for their continued coverage of Canadian Club events. To learn more about the Canadian Club and our upcoming events, please visit us at www.canadianclub.org. Thank you all for joining us. A special thanks to our panel and to everybody who contributed to this wonderful report. The meeting is now adjourned.